An empath woman doesn't stop chasing an avoidant man because her feelings fade. She stops because something inside her finally clicks. The moment she pulls back isn't born from indifference, it's born from awakening. A moment where something inside her shifts from instinctive overgiving to conscious self-preservation. It's the moment she realizes she's been carrying a relationship that the avoidant man keeps quietly running from. And when she finally stops, the dynamic flips in a way he never expected, because contrary to what he believes, she doesn't break when she stops trying. She stabilizes. She recalibrates. She sees the relationship without the fog of emotional labor, and once she steps out of the pattern, everything he thought he controlled begins to unravel. This shift doesn't happen overnight. Empaths don't walk away impulsively. They walk away after months, sometimes years, of translating silence, absorbing emotional distance, and trying to bridge the space he keeps creating. For her, connection isn't a strategy, it's instinct. Empaths are wired to soothe, to understand, to heal. Their first response is always compassion, never withdrawal. So when she stops chasing, it's not because she's giving up. It's because she's finally seeing the psychological cost of staying. Jung once said that people don't see their patterns until the tension becomes unbearable. And for the empath woman, the tension with an avoidant man becomes unbearable when she realizes she's the only one regulating both sides of the relationship. She becomes the emotional container for two people, and at some point, her nervous system hits its limit. When that happens, her mind does something surprising. It stops romanticizing the potential. It stops believing in the emotional someday. It begins to see the avoidant man not as a wounded soul she can help, but as a man who cannot meet her where she stands. That's the moment the old dynamic collapses. And for the avoidant man, this collapse is not silent, even if she is. Avoidant men are accustomed to being pursued by women who care deeply. They're familiar with being emotionally followed whenever they pull away. It reinforces their unconscious belief that closeness is dangerous, but connection will always chase them anyway. So when the empath stops chasing, the emotional landscape inside him shifts in ways he cannot articulate. At first, he experiences something that looks like relief. The pressure lifts. The emotional expectations dissolve. The space he craves finally appears. But then something strange happens. The silence he thought he wanted becomes loud. Not loud with her words, but loud with his own internal tension, the tension he usually escapes by running. He notices he checks his phone more, not because he plans to respond, but because he's waiting for something familiar, her effort, her softness, her reassurance that the bond is still alive. When nothing comes, the relief he felt mutates into unease. This is the moment he begins to feel the loss, a loss he never planned for because he assumed she would always be there. Without her emotional presence to regulate the connection, he suddenly has to sit with the reality of his own withdrawal. No one is filling the space anymore. No one is bridging the gap. No one is interpreting his silence with empathy. In Jungian terms, he becomes confronted with his shadow, the parts of himself he avoids, fear, inadequacy, emotional dependence. Without her presence to soften that reflection, he has no buffer, and the image he sees is uncomfortable. For the empath woman, meanwhile, the shift continues internally. The absence of chasing gives her access to her own needs again, needs she suppressed because she was too busy tending to his. She starts to remember how much energy she gave, how much reassurance she offered, how much emotional clarity she provided. She begins to see the relationship not as intense chemistry, but as constant imbalance. And that awareness is grounding. Empaths often confuse emotional labor with emotional connection. But once she stops giving, she realizes how much he wasn't giving at all. She sees the emotional one-sidedness with unsettling clarity. The spell breaks. And this clarity changes her energy, not in a performative way, but in a regulated, self-protective way that avoidant men feel long before she says a word. Avoidant men are extremely attuned to shifts in the emotional environment. They may not speak about emotions, but they sense changes instinctively. When she stops chasing, he doesn't just notice the absence of her messages. He notices the absence of her emotional availability, the disappearance of her warmth, the end of the emotional safety he quietly relied on. And that's when the dynamic flips. He begins to replay old interactions. Conversations he didn't think twice about become psychologically meaningful in hindsight. He reinterprets her patience as something rare, her understanding as something he didn't appreciate, her consistency as something he took for granted. Without realizing it, he begins to feel the absence of qualities he didn't know he depended on. This isn't romantic nostalgia, it's psychological dissonance. The avoidant man feels what he claims not to need. He misses what he once dismissed. And the tension between those two feelings creates confusion, a confusion that often turns into longing. He may not reach out, but he thinks about reaching out. He may not admit regret, but he feels it quietly and painfully. He may not voice loss, but he experiences it somatically in the late-night scrolling, the random memories, the sudden curiosity about her life, the subtle panic that she might be moving on. Meanwhile, the empath woman becomes more grounded, more discerning. She starts noticing other areas of her life she neglected. She begins reconnecting with her own identity, the one that existed before she became emotionally entangled with someone who couldn't meet her halfway. And this rediscovery changes the entire relational field. When she stops absorbing his emotional distance, he has to face it alone. When she stops initiating conversations, he has to confront his own silence. When she stops placing him at the center of her emotional world, he has to confront the emptiness of his own. This is the psychological reversal that happens every time an empath woman stops chasing an avoidant man. The truth is, she doesn't become cold. She becomes conscious, and that consciousness breaks the old pattern. For the avoidant man, this is destabilizing. His entire relational strategy relies on the belief that closeness is optional and distance is safe. But when she stops chasing, he discovers something that contradicts this belief. Distance costs something real, something emotional, something he wasn't prepared to lose. He begins to wonder if he made a mistake. He wonders why she suddenly feels harder to reach, even if she hasn't blocked him or cut him off. He wonders why he feels tension he can't explain. And underneath all of that wondering is a deeper realization. She was the emotional anchor he never acknowledged. When an empath woman stops chasing, she doesn't punish the avoidant. She simply stops abandoning herself. And the moment she comes back to herself, the avoidant man loses the version of her he knew. The version who would always close the distance, always soothe the silence, always repair the breaks he caused. That version is gone. And what replaces it is a woman who sees the relationship clearly, a woman who recognizes her own worth, a woman who understands that chasing someone who fears closeness creates a psychological loop she can no longer participate in. That's the shift. Not drama, not revenge, not emotional games, just awareness. The empath woman steps out of the story, and the avoidant man is left with the ending he wrote, an ending he never expected to feel so strongly. Because when she stops trying to fix the connection, he finally has to face why he couldn't hold it. And that moment, that quiet, inevitable moment, is where everything changes.